I'm just going to give you a quick introduction of the names and the organizations of the people who are going to be speaking and leading us today, and then I'm going to turn it over. First, I have Kirsten Sundell with the Southern Regional Education Board. Next to her is Laura Hummell from the Pennsylvania Department of Education. Next to her is Lavender from the Ohio Department of Education. And all the way on the end, last but not least, is Mike Mulvihill from the Mississippi Department of Education. And they're going to be speaking. Twitter handles are on the board. Take it away.
Thank you, Whitney, for that introduction. And again, I'm Kirsten Sundell with the Southern Regional Education Board, and I promise I will only take this one opportunity to shill the Computer Science Commission report that I wrote last year and we published in November of 2016. If you were at this morning's session on national policy perspectives on computer science education, I talked about this a little bit. Unfortunately, I've run out of copies, so if you would like one, just give me your card, or I can give you my card, and I'll get one to you right away. So I'm going to try to get out of the way of our panelists and really let them speak for themselves. But we have today three great panelists who are bringing you their perspectives as folks who are involved with computer science initiatives in states that are closer maybe to the start of their journeys than, say, states like Arkansas that are pretty far advanced. So I'm just going to ask each of them to reintroduce themselves and share, how they're involved in their state's computer science initiative and really what the lay of the land is in their states. So thank you.
I'm Laura Hummell. I'm from the Pennsylvania Department of Education, and I was most recently a university professor. For 8 years, I taught at a small teachers college just outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So I learned a lot about computer science by default because I was told, oh, by the way, you can teach these classes, right? Because you're in tech and engineering education, you can teach anything that involves technology, which is computers only. Right? So it was one of those things. And if you're wondering about my handle, I have a wonderful 66 Mustang coupe sitting in my garage that I work on. Nobody else touches. So that's one of those unique things about me is that I came from a very, very unusual background. And I was a part of the military, then I went into industry, and then I went into education. And so as that, I had a unique perspective on things when it came to computer science and so on, because I was one of the first females to work on computer science initiatives in my high school in the 80s. That was one of my mentors actually developed a computer science program in a small rural school district because she saw the future. And I'm very fortunate because of her. And her being so forward-thinking 30-some years ago. Just a little bit about Pennsylvania. Our computer science education timeline started around 2010. But really, we didn't do anything with it until just recently in 2016. When the Running on Empty report was released, they really examined all of the states and how they were implementing computer science education, or if they weren't. And at the time, we did have computer science standards, but they were embedded in a lot of different places. There was a little bit here in business computer information technology, a little bit somewhere else. So we are looking at how to put all of that together now. So we're flying the plane as we're building it. So I'm going to pass this on to Holly. I've only been at the Department of Education for 6 months, so I'm the newbie on the board. I'm learning as I go. So here's Holly.
I've been at the Department of Education slightly longer, but not by a whole lot. I've been with the Ohio Department of Education for about 2 years. I've been with the Office of Innovation in the agency for about a year. I am the STEM project lead in that office, and so a lot of what we do is looking for scaling up best practices across the state. And so just to say a little bit is how did I, as a person who has never been a computer science teacher, end up working with computer science? Part of the reason is Lisa Chambers, who's sitting here in the office, in the audience today. One of the things that we started last year as part of the work with STEM is that we wanted to take a look at what's the next steps with STEM. We've been doing things with STEM in Ohio for a while. We've had specialized STEM schools for about 10 years, but a lot of things have happened in education for the past 10 years. So we just wanted to take a look and take an update, what things need to maybe be rethinking a little bit. We did notice that a lot of the STEM activity was following that I-71 corridor, was in a lot of our suburban districts, and we were not reaching the rural parts of our state very well. So that's something that we really wanted to look at. So we brought in a group of STEM professionals, STEM educators, STEM stakeholders, and people who are involved with STEM in some way and supporting it throughout the state. And we're just calling them a STEM working group, and they're working with us in our office to help develop a strategic plan for STEM in Ohio, and computer science is part of that. The very first meeting that we had with them, we asked them, well, what are some of the things we should be thinking about? And they all said computer science. So that's kind of one of the reasons that our office ended up looking at it. And so when I was kind of looking at some of the things that were out there, just a little bit about my background before I took this position, I was a science content specialist in the curriculum office. And we were also put in a position where in Ohio, because of some legislation that took place, we had to develop our own math assessments in a very short amount of time, and I was tasked to helping develop the elementary math assessments, and I got to know those items very intimately. And so when I started looking at some of the things that were out there with computer science and what some of the tools did, it just hit me like, this is elementary math. It's the same thinking. Is anybody out there looking at this way of helping to embed computer science skills directly in the math courses? And somebody in our agency said, well, yes, there is. E4 Tech, Lisa Chambers' group is doing that. And so she's working with 3rd and 4th grade students. Is it mostly 3rd and 4th grade, Lisa? And if you look at the math standards for grades 3 and 4 and look at the thinking that's involved, it's the foundational pieces. It's that computational thinking that you really start thinking about first. Order matters. Sometimes you can group things. Sometimes there's more efficient ways to do things. It's the same thinking. So that's kind of the other reason that our office and me, a non-computer science person, I had done coding before, but that's how I ended up with it. So moving forward then, what we noticed when we identified some of the priorities in STEM is we saw some of the same issues and challenges were showing up for computer science that were showing up for STEM. So you say, for example, equity and access is one of those things. We're seeing that for computer science, that's also true. I asked our licensure office, can you pull me some data of all the people in Ohio who have a computer science license or endorsement? So they've done that. I'm in the process of going through all of that data, but there are some interesting patterns in that support that, yes, it seems to be strong in some of our larger suburban districts that have a little bit more money. So Cleveland is very rich in computer science up in that part of the state, but it seems like the further south you go, you have less and less chance of seeing that. We're not really sure why that's happening. That's something that needs to be explored. But that's something that we're looking at is where are the teachers located that are doing it, what types of classes are they teaching, and so forth. One thing also was we were hearing from some people in the field who work with computer science is that when they would call the department and ask for someone to talk to, they would get directed to the CTE office, and that's not what they needed. We don't have a person in Ohio right now that's a dedicated computer science person, so that's something that we're probably going to have to think about, is because those questions are out there and they get directed to CTE, and right now in Ohio a lot of that is around the certifications for different things like that. It's a little bit different than the academic focus. I don't have a good idea for where we stand with the AP course at this time. Another thing that we're seeing kind of related to that is around teachers. We're seeing that in some cases, one thing that we need to be careful about is computer science has not been identified as a teacher shortage for Ohio, but it's because of the way that we're defining it. The way that it's defined is you have a lot of unfilled positions. Well, we don't have unfilled positions because the positions are not there. And so that is something that I think is important as a piece of information to be thinking about is why aren't they there? The schools aren't teaching it. So it's a lot of it is messaging and trying to help people understand the difference between a career tech pathway and a more academic pathway, and that all students need this. It's not just for certain groups of students. So we have a lot of messaging that we really need to do in general. We do have a bill that's currently in front of our legislature. It's made it through the House. It's currently in the Senate, so we'll see where we land on that. But that is to introduce standards for computer science into Ohio. We don't see that anybody is pushing back on it, so, but hopefully we'll know an answer on that later on this summer of whether or not we're going to be able to do that. I think right now, if it does go through, the current language has development and adoption of by the board at the end of 2018. Let's see. One last thing is students can get math credit for a computer science course, but right now that teacher has to be highly qualified in math to do that. And I think the legislation that's in front of the House and the Senate right now kind of has some workarounds for that, but again, we'll have to see where we land on that when it's all said and done. So I'm going to stop there and pass it on.
I'm starting my clock because I have a tendency to talk and talk and talk. So they told me I had 10 minutes, and I'll hold it to that. I'm Mike Mulvihill. I am the Director of Career and Technical Education for the Mississippi Department of Education. So I'm going to pick up where my colleague left off, because Career Tech actually has a lot to bring to the party when it comes to STEM-related activities, IT, computer science, whatever you want to call it. My background is I've been with the Department of Education for about 25 years. So as opposed to the newbies over here, I've seen things come and go back and forth. This is one of the best projects that we've ever worked on. We're CS for MS. And I'll give you a little of the background there. First of all, my background is I'm an alternate educator. I have a bachelor's and master's in business administration. So one of my elective courses, my master's work, was systems analysis and design. I spent about 2.5 years in one part of the Department of Education in computer support. So I had network administrator rights. We had our own system I was in child nutrition at the time, for purchasing. We had a cooperative to purchase food and supplies for the entire state of Mississippi. So you can imagine when you had contracts for the whole state, then everybody got the buying power. Now, one of the things I will tell you about the state of Mississippi, despite what you may think, we are not one giant urban sprawl. So there are lots of rural areas in the state of Mississippi, and these are things that we have to keep in mind, because everybody will tell us immediately, keep in mind the smaller areas and how does that access work? How will that training work? How will things roll out for the smaller areas in addition to the few metro areas that we have? So the background is we're almost 2 years into this project. So we had a task force that was formed, and we took a look at where did we want to go. The drivers behind this were, one, our state superintendent, Dr. Kerry Wright, said we need to do a computer science K-12 process. So we actually had some pretty good building blocks to start with. In the late 1990s, 95, 97, things like that, our state got out of industrial arts and home ec at the middle school level and moved into tech prep format. So we had a 7th grade career exploration course, we had an 8th grade computer discovery course, and then a 9th grade technology discovery course. Well, as you can imagine, these things get a little long in tooth and so forth. But the great thing was almost every middle school in the state of Mississippi had this. So this was a tremendous building block for us as we started moving forward. So about 2008, 2009, we rewrote all of those courses into a 7th grade Information Communication Technology 1, an ICT 2 course in the 8th grade, and then a STEM Emerging Technology course in the 9th grade. So the key to this was we put wired labs into every single one of those areas. So now all of a sudden, in the middle of 2008, 2009, and so forth, all these classes are in wired labs, and we did the training and required certification for those teachers to teach there. So we had that to start with when we were moving into this. On the career tech side, we had IT courses, And the students that go through our IT courses will be able to sit for 2 national certifications, including a networking certification. We have a digital media class, and so that's web design, graphic arts, and then Final Cut Pro, which is a television editing piece. And then we actually have some simulation game design programs as well. And so this gave us some building blocks. One of the other things that happened several years ago was our academic people on the business and tech ed side came to us in Career Tech and said, look, let's work together in rewriting the business and the tech ed courses. So what we did was condense a lot of programs that really were not being utilized by people out in the field, because it takes just as much money to keep up a course for one school district that has 5 students in it than it does for 200 across the state. And so by going through the sequential course process for the Career Tech, which is required, then we also set it up in a way that you could break this out into 4 separate one Carnegie unit courses, and so now you can teach them at the high school. So we've seen kind of a gain in the business tech ed side, because you could take our IT course and break it into a networking 1 and a networking 2. You could have a software piece, a hardware piece, and that type of thing. So those are things that we had to build on. The other thing I will mention is that we have a requirement for graduation purposes that you have to take and pass one of our middle school programs for graduation. There's a technology requirement that's already built in. So we had some of these things that were already set up. And what I'll tell you on the career tech side too is, in many of our courses, we have got about 50 robotic engineering courses. Of course, there's some software pieces that are built into that. And then we're also moving forward in some of our ag courses, because I heard somebody talking about that in the previous session, moving into drone technology, GPS, and GIS. So you've got some embedded computer science pieces in some of the things that we're doing there. So we had those things to build on. Another driver is that some of our better, more aggressive and more affluent school districts, we're starting to move this down into a K-5 area anyway. One of the big drivers behind those ICT and STEM courses is we did not want a digital divide for our students. Because again, so many rural areas, in so many cases, you may only have modem dial-up still in certain parts of the state of Mississippi. Broadband is not universal there. So if you could get that at the school and you could get that training, then how much better off were you? Same type of thing here. So what we've done is we've partnered with everybody that would stand still long enough for us to talk to, and that includes our buddies over here at SREB. So when she says she's shilling for that, we bought into some of that. We bought into the code.org piece. So here's how our pilot process was working. Keep in mind that for number standpoints, the state of Mississippi, about 490,000 students per year, K-12, and 144 school districts. So how do you reach and hit all of those things? I was listening to a presentation a little earlier today, and they talked about small school district with less than 20 schools. Well, that's us. That is us to a T. So what we did was, working with code.org, we have got about 35 school districts that are piloting this year a K-5 piece. And the idea is that we would do the training if you would come and sign off on some assurances. Now, the assurances had to be from superintendents, curriculum people, all of those types of things. And so they had to offer between 20 and 40 hours per grade this first year. So we'll continue to kind of bump that up. At the 9th grade level, where we could build into that STEM piece that we already had in place, we're offering Exploring Computer Science in conjunction with UCLA and the City of Los Angeles. So Exploring Computer Science, if you're not familiar with that, has 6 big parts to it. And so there's the web design, there's the data analysis, there's a robotics piece and so forth. And at the same time, while we've got those homegrown information communication technology and STEM courses, we're rewriting those a year at a time. So if we do this the right way, those ICT and STEM courses that we have, and we have about 700 teachers statewide that teach those, we'll continue to adapt certain parts of this in the existing courses while we're building the new cyber application courses, and hopefully 3 or 4 years from now, we soft land in the middle where everybody is teaching the new cyber application courses. So that's pressure point number 1 for us. We feel like that the K-5 piece is a relatively easy lift. The training for the middle school part is going to be the difficult part, because we can write the curriculum and we can work with people for curriculum adaptation processes. That training is going to be pressure point number 1. The ECS part seems to have gone pretty well. The one kind of pushback that we've heard from people is we've allowed a wide group of people to come in and teach this, because I've heard this several times during the course of today's conference, is that if you just keep stealing those math and science people, principals and curriculum people and so forth get mad at you So if you expand this, though, the training has to be more rigorous because you're going to have people that, and I sat through some of the training last summer, people get scared. I'm really not a designer. I don't know about the coding part of it. So not only did we do summer training last year, we've had follow-ups and webinars to try and pinpoint those areas where people had concerns or fears, or maybe we were a little weak in our initial training. Same thing with the ECS part. So that brings us to pressure point number 2, which is the high school part of it. So we have got some of these courses, we don't have nearly enough. But to drill down and to go deeper into Java and database administration and things like that, we're looking at what would an online process look like. Because again, trying to find the number of teachers and trying to pay them is going to be a real issue. So as we kind of get through this first year, we feel like we've made a lot of gains. We had about 35 school districts this year. We're going to add about 15 more. Now, that's a money thing there, but we're going to add about 15 more school districts. So roughly 1/3 of the state will be on our pilot project for the 17-18 school year. One of the benefits we do have, though, is that our state career tech appropriation pays for a big chunk of the teacher's salary and a lot of the training for those middle school parts. It comes through Career Tech because that's where it originated, but it's for all students in those middle school areas. So this allows us to use the mandates of the Carl Perkins piece, which say academic, vocational, and technical, and then utilize some of the professional development and leadership funds to help pay for some of these types of things. So that's why in our state, Career Tech gets a lot of those calls because we're really embedded in this, for a variety of reasons. It's our best interest to be a part of the process overall. It's also in our best interest to have some of our program specialists involved in this because we've got a middle school STEM specialist. We have a high school STEM specialist that we're just in the process of hiring. So we can add a lot of background and depth and professional development out in the field. And then the last advantage we have is we work very closely with Mississippi State University's Research and Curriculum Unit. They have got a lot of young brainiacs that they can put on projects like this. And then one of our other team members is out in the audience right now from Maris Baker & West, one of our public relation firms there. So we've reached out as much as we possibly could to try and draw as many people into the circle as we can for collaboration purposes and for resource purposes. And that is my story.
Thank you, Mike. Now, you raised this issue, as did Holly, but how are your states approaching the teacher preparation pipeline? Specifically, how are your state universities cooperating with you to develop those pre-service programs that can help you get the computer science teachers trained to actually go out and roll out these curricula?
One of the things that we're doing, and this is really kind of a general overall statement, and I'll kind of drill down. In the state of Mississippi, there is a state board of education for K-12, there is a state board for community colleges, there is a state board for the Institution of Higher Learning. And so we have been working for several years now to try and create pathways that go through that entire process. And so in many cases, if a student wants to opt out after a diploma, that's one thing. But most of our students tend to go to community colleges. We have 15 community colleges, but about 80 sites across the state. So it's affordable and it's accessible and so forth. And so then we push on, and we've got a great working relationship with our IHL people. And so as we try and get those pathways in place, and of course computer science would be one of those, then we're also trying to work with the teacher preparation piece because there's so many competing demands. There's the special education piece, there's a STEM piece and so forth, but we want to try and embed more of this in there, particularly as we move more toward the high school part of this.
That's a challenge in Ohio right now, and part of that we're hearing from the field is due to the result of some changes in the way that we issue licenses in Ohio. We have an integrated license now that it actually is more difficult for a person to become certified to be a chemistry teacher than it is to get a degree to be a professional chemist. Just because of the change in the licensure, it takes 5 years for that person to go through that program to get that certification, and then they have to go through a residency program. All of that and I'm going to make a lot less money. And so we literally have a situation right now in Ohio where we have colleges that are graduating one or none people in those areas. And so then the same thing is seeming to be true for computer science, and a lot of it is same sort of a thing. It's which path am I going to choose? Am I going to take the path where I'm going to make a lot more money? I don't have to do so many courses, or vice versa. And so the people that are choosing to become teachers these are people who really want to teach. And so part of that is it's kind of unintended consequences of a few years ago. We were looking at this and really wanting to make sure that we had highly qualified people in the classroom, but at the same time we've put some barriers in place that we are not getting the teachers we need, and that's especially true in the physical sciences in Ohio right now. One thing that our Career Tech office has done to try to get around some of the need for, well, I think it's Project Lead the Way that they're working through. If you're familiar with that, there's a certain series of courses that teachers who teach those courses, they go through that training. It's offered by that program itself. And so in Ohio, and this may be true in other states as well, even if the teacher is not licensed in computer science, if they've taken that Project Lead the Way computer science course, they can teach that course. As long as they teach that course and they don't stray from it, they can submit their certificate, and there's an override they can go through. So that's one way that we're meeting the need, is allowing people to get a workaround for that. And there's also, in the middle school level, we have something that's called the middle school validation, which is very similar. It's a series of courses that we offer through our own website. It's free, doesn't cost the teachers anything, and then they're qualified then to teach like a career exploration course. And so that's something that our work group is looking at, that model, because it's been successful in getting people to be able to teach a class without having to go through additional expense of an endorsement and so forth. And so the number of courses that they're able to teach is limited, but it's providing a path for having qualified people to teach the courses. So that's something that we're exploring for STEM, and then we may look at for computer science as well.
In Pennsylvania right now, we're looking at actually 3 different populations. We're looking at current educators and how can we get them certified or endorsed in computer science education. So those talks are ongoing. As I sit here, we're looking at certification. We're looking at possible STEM or computer science endorsements. We're looking at that piece through Project Lead the Way, through our higher education institutions, different post-secondary opportunities, and so on. And we're also working with our future educator populations. We're looking at the teacher prep institutions throughout the state and determining who's interested, how do we do this, what can we do for future educators that doesn't add just one more thing to their list of stuff to do before they graduate from a post-secondary education institution in Pennsylvania. And then we started looking at those people that are alternative licensure, business and industry partners, looking at mentoring programs, looking at after-school programs, looking at possibly an adjunct model where you'd have a person from industry come in and teach one class, and so on. And then we had our Office of Child Development and Early Learning come on board. And they said this should be a birth through post-secondary thing. Children are born having email addresses, computers in their hands, devices of all kinds. So why are we limiting ourselves to just when they get into kindergarten, when we should be talking about that as an emerging piece right from the beginning, right from the time that they enter in any kind of world, because it is a global world. And so we've looked at that through that lens too, because it's something that we can't discuss away anymore. My own children were all born with email addresses, but that was something that was unusual for my generation, not so much for this next generation. So it's one of those pieces that we've all tried to look at. And I'm a Troops to Teachers grad, so I came through the military. and I got my teaching degree in that way. So we need to look at all of these different things that we haven't even considered yet, especially those business and industry partners, because we know the mentoring and advocacy is something that touches all the different stakeholders in the room. We actually had legislation that came down. There's that 10 priorities that MassCan's report put out. Develop your standards, develop your frameworks, develop your teacher prep and your certification and so on. We started with step 9 of 10. We actually, in Pennsylvania, said, oh, okay, now you can substitute computer science and information technology coursework for one of your math or science graduation credits. And because we started with step 9 of 10, now we're trying to build the foundation that we should have built already. So we are looking at that birth through post-secondary education piece.
Thank you, Laura. I'm going to pitch another question back to you and then maybe extend it to our other two panelists. But what steps are you taking in Pennsylvania to ensure equitable access to quality computer science education programs and also to encourage diversity in computer science?
One of the first things that we talked about was developing a strategic plan with a realistic timeline, because we are always doing things because they were mandated from on high, and then having to scramble to actually set up something that makes sense. So that was one of the first things that we talked about. And of course, we weren't realistic. We wanted to do everything in 2 or 3 months, and that doesn't always happen. 10 months into this process and only 6 months at the Department of Education, I'm seeing a lot of things move slowly in education, especially when legislators are involved. We have continually pushed for the computer science for all. And we have a wonderful relationship with our career and technical centers, our career and technical education people who are looking at that adult re-education in Pennsylvania. We are known as the Rust Belt. We lost the steel industry. Coal is disappearing. And as we know, we have a lot of people in the adult population that need these skills too. So we actually had that adult literacy piece that came around. And when we start educating the adult population who thought, oh, I could never do that, I actually had a grandmother in one of the after-school programs that I was working with, and she came just because her grandkids were there and she didn't have any other way to get them back and forth. So then she started doing some of the code.org pieces and was having a blast. And I'd hear giggling at the back of the room, and I'd think, what is she doing? She was playing some of the Angry Birds and doing the coding and so on. And so we've actually changed the face of things because we're looking at it through a very unusual lens. We're looking at through the Zulama piece, the gamification of education. We're looking at our business and industry partners. We're looking at early childhood development pieces. How do we reach out to all of those people, because it is for all. I love the AP Computer Science. I love Project Lead the Way, but it touches such a small percentage of the population that concerns me as a mother and as a woman and so on, that we miss out on so much if we don't start until they're in kindergarten, or we don't start until they're in 3rd or 4th or 5th or 6th or 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade, whatever. Because most children form those gender biases by the time they're 6 years old. Research has shown it. And if we don't address those pieces, and we don't show people at the other end that lifelong learning and computer science and computational thinking are important no matter what you do for a living. The grandmother that I was talking about that loved code.org and has gone on was a maid in a hotel. And because of that, she started looking at this, and now she's a front desk manager. And so she's made that transition. And it's amazing to me, those kinds of stories. And we all have those stories. It's just being able to pull all those stories together and show how do we do this from birth through adulthood.
Okay, we're really just getting started in this piece of it. because I think right now we don't have a really solid feel of what the landscape really looks like at the local level. So that's one thing we want to try to get a better understanding of, is what is really happening in our rural areas with girls, underrepresented students, and so forth. What is really happening there? I think one thing that we've talked about, and I went to the design challenge in the second session intentionally because that's the approach that we want to take for this. We think that that human part of it is going to be really important in trying to address those specific problems. And so this is something that our work group is going to be challenged with. I'm actually going to be presenting it to them as a design challenge next week. And so they're going to be put to the task of, let's go do this. Empathy piece is really important. Let's go out and talk to people. Let's talk to kids. Let's talk to parents. Let's talk to stakeholders and get some stories, kind of like what you were talking about, because that's really important. What are we not thinking of? Because what we've tried in the past isn't really working. And so what are we missing? Let's talk to real people, and let's not make assumptions about what we think is going to make it work. Let's talk to them. So in terms of what are our approaches, we're just getting started, but that's what we're going to attempt to do.
Mississippi is a top-down state, so when we develop curriculum, we're expecting that everybody's going to utilize that curriculum, which can be a real strength in, as we're accumulating information, we can make those tweaks and then they can factor down to everyone. So as we do the type of training that we do during the summer, we trained over 200 teachers last summer, then everyone's going to get the same type of training on the same curriculum. And then we'll come back and we'll cycle back through that again. One of the things I will tell you, and again, some of these things are through a career tech lens. In career technical education, there are federal mandates for non-traditional participation. And so basically, for the most part, that's a gender piece. We in the state of Mississippi, to help alleviate some of these things, are partners with NAEP STEM equity piece. And so we're actually meeting with, we've got 3 school districts involved in this now because we think it's a big deal. We want everybody to have that opportunity. In the state of Mississippi right now, only about 55% of all the people that can work are working. So we need everyone involved in this. And so as a result, if you make this a quality effort, then we feel like that school districts will buy into this, will expand faster, it'll be better. The other thing I will mention is the workforce piece of this. Mississippi is on the cusp of being an advanced manufacturing state. We have a Nissan plant, we have a Toyota plant, there's a massive shipbuilding group, Northrop Grumman on the coast, GE has a plant there, and then Continental Tires has just broken ground on a 2,500 person plant in the central Mississippi area. So when you think about the workforce needs, and then you add in the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, where all parts of the state have got to have a state plan on how they're going to deal with things, the northeastern part of our state, which has a manufacturing corridor, has identified information technology as one of their major emphasis. And so when you think about that, they talk about how that, of course, cycles through healthcare and advanced manufacturing and things like this. So now we start getting the workforce people involved in this on top of what we're trying to do with the Department of Education, because as these folks will find, and they're already finding out, sometimes you can be that lone wolf crying in the wilderness. But when the workforce people get involved and they say we need people, and they're willing to put time, effort, and money into this, we're going to start to see this cycle through a little bit faster, I believe.
Thanks, Mike. There are a number of folks in the audience who are representatives of advocacy organizations and curriculum developers and just expert groups in general. What would you like them to know about working with you to support your computer science initiatives in your states? How can they help you? And that's for anyone.
I think that sending us enthusiastic advocates and mentors, that's a key piece that we often miss, especially when it comes to equitable access and diversity. We want to see people that look like us, that talk like us, and so on. And to really help us have scaled and sustained communications and resources and reviews. Be honest with us. When we mess up, say, okay, we're not addressing this piece for whatever I need in this workforce. I'm not getting out what I need. So how do we all work together to develop what we all need. We want an educated population, we want involved citizenry, and we want people that have those problem-solving skills and that computational thinking and lifelong learning. So how do we all work together? And I think communication is the key, and having everybody that is interested on board, but remembering that the way we do things in education isn't always the way you do things in the military or industry. So things, sometimes we have 2 different languages, or 3 or 4 or 10 that we're talking.
I think what I was going to say was very similar to that. We are aware of a number of organizations in the state, but it seems like in Ohio sometimes there's pockets and people are doing something here and something here, and all over, but they're not connected necessarily. And so that's one thing that our office in this past year has tried to find who's doing what and where, and to see if we can act as like a convener to pull people together. So I'd say, like in Ohio, let us know where you are and what you're doing, so that we can pull you into this fold. Because that's one thing I think that is really important, is to get everybody on the same page. We can do a lot more together as one than in separate pieces. I think that's what you were saying as well. So that's what I would say would be helpful to us in Ohio, is to work together with us towards one common goal and help us to work as one.
I think I would echo that, but I would also drill down. There are some people that believe that the school district and schoolhouses are gated communities, that they're not welcome there. And so if you really want to make that impact and you want to have that influence, you need to talk to principals, you need to talk to counselors and so forth, because how do you model these types of things, or how do you get involved and work with students? So if you want more female folks in the computer science area, you want more people of minorities or so forth, how do you get involved in those types of things where you can bring something to the party? And you have to model that at the state level too. So at our summer conference in a couple of months, we're going to have Kaylee McKay be one of our speakers for our CTE summer conference. She is a do-it-yourself host. I saw her a couple of years ago at the Skills USA piece, and so she hits a lot of pockets for us. We want to talk about skills. We want to talk about women in skills and things like that. So we're modeling that at the state level. So you have to have some influence down, I think, at the local level, and then at the state level, we have to model those types of things as well.
Well, we're about 40 minutes in, so I think there's time for audience questions. And if Whitney could give us a hand with the microphone.
Anyone?
Anyone have questions?
Oh,
Pat?
You got it.
Hey folks, how are you measuring the progress of your work when it comes to getting computer science in schools? And really what I'd love to hear about are your data systems for measuring that. And if you don't have data systems for measuring that, just how are you just gauging the level of CS uptake, whether it's schools, districts, what have you. So that one day you can pop that champagne and say, yeah, we're at 99%, that's good enough.
Because Pennsylvania is a local decision state, we do not have that in place. We are looking at that accountability and accessibility piece, because without that, we'll never be able to say, we have X amount of students that are actually getting computer science education. And that frustrates me, because I think that this is very important. And we mandate other things. We have gateway tests and things like that they have to take in our state in order to graduate. And we have other options for them if they don't pass those tests. But we've never approached the computer science piece as a literacy piece, or as a computational thinking piece, or that mathematical piece. And I think that is something that we need to do, and do soon. Because without it, we're going to, once again, have pockets of things that are wonderful, but it's a very small percentage of the population in Pennsylvania. So unfortunately, that's my answer. and hopefully we can change that in the near future.
One thing that we would have to look at, I mean, we're just getting started as well, but to get a baseline in place first is where are we right now, so that we have something to compare against to see if we are making some improvements. But we're doing that right now just by looking at the licensure data and seeing where our teachers are located, because that will tell us where it's being taught. But what I want to do is to dig down a little bit more into our EMIS data to find out what courses those are, because that will give us a little bit better feel for what's happening in different places across the state. So we can get some numbers on that. It takes a little bit of time because they have to go through and do some things with those files, which takes a lot of time first. But that is something that we're looking at to try to get some actual numbers, just to where are we right now.
In our state, we know who signs up because there's a piece of paper that they have to sign off on for a 3-year pilot project. So our CS for MS part will be a 3-year project. So we're ending the first year of the project this week. Schools are letting out this week and so forth. So we'll start gathering some information there, and then we'll follow that cohort, knowing that we're adding a second cohort for 17-18, and we'll continue to go from there. So as far as actual empirical data, we're finishing up the first year of that. Some of the decisions that we'll have to make down the road are what will be mandatory. We haven't gotten to that point yet. So as we go through a K-12 continuum, where do we test? What do you have to offer as a school district? You know, we talked about this a little bit earlier. We do have a technical requirement for graduation. That'll stay in place. Where does that stay at right now? It's at that middle school part. So students can take our STEM course, our ICT2 course, or we have another course called Technology Foundation, and that will satisfy that graduation requirement. But we've got a task force that we're probably going to be turning over a little bit. In fact, having some conversation with our folks earlier today, because that task force helped us jumpstart this process, but now probably needs to move to a different gear. And how do we take additional people involved in this? How do we move forward? And then we are one of those that's written for a National Science Foundation grant as well. And so we would have that whole practitioner piece that we would fold in there if in fact we do that. So we're finished up the first year, but there's some big decisions that we'll have to make in the next couple of years or so.
Hi, I'm Sheila Van Hoos with Code.org over here in the Code.org huddle, except for Pat over there. I want to ask the same question that I asked the last panel, which is, from your perspective in your own states, you guys have heard questions asked by policymakers over the years. What do you think is, from your opinion, what is the barrier for advancing the CS movement?
All right, several barriers. One will be capacity. And we talked about the high school part of it a little earlier today. So how do we get more embedded or more advanced in the high school piece? The other will be continuous training, particularly that middle school part and so forth. And then if we make this mandatory, then of course there will be some blowback from people who go, how am I going to fit this into the schedule? How am I going to find these teachers and things like that? So how do we deal with the capacity standpoint for the parts that we do make mandatory? Right now what we're trying to do is make this so effective and so good that people want to sign up for this and that it is effective. And so we continue to grow that part of it. And then, you know, we really haven't talked about money. There'll always be financial issues and so forth, but I think that the major part of it will be the capacity at the middle school level for us to continue to train and get the right people in place, and then the high school part of it. And so as we try and sell this to the general public, I don't think we'll have any problem with the parents and the students. Certainly they do very well when they're exposed to this, but there are sometimes some structural problems that I think we'll run into from an educational standpoint.
Say for us, right now, a lot of it is about just really understanding what computer science is. Same thing with STEM. There's a misconception that if I teach a project lead the way course, or if I have a robotics course, I'm a STEM school, and that's not really the case. It's a lot more than that. And there's some misconceptions about computer science as well. It's more than just coding and having one-to-one laptops and with all of the kids. So messaging is a piece of it. I think a lot of the biggest piece is is the teachers, like you were saying, capacity, having the teachers to do it. On the way here, My flight from Ohio to Los Angeles, I was sitting next to an IT professional, and we talked the entire way about computer science policy. And he had an interesting perspective, and he made a point that I think is kind of important. He says, well, you know, the field is changing so fast that by the time that you get somebody licensed, it may already be outdated, and so that's something that I think might be important. And his suggestion was you really need to partner teachers with professionals, sort of like what they're doing with the TEALS program. In Ohio, the only district that's really doing that is up in Cleveland. But he's saying, you know, you've got all these people in Central Ohio and Cincinnati. You've got people all over the state of Ohio who would be willing to come in and do that. You just got to ask. So that's something that I think we probably need to think about, is the capacity and the rate of growth and the rate of change in the field itself is something that is probably going to be, we're going to have to find a way to keep up with that.
I was actually thinking, and I'm going to do this very quickly, 6 factors that really affect what we do. The changing face of the workforce. Blending skills that we already have with things that we don't even know we need yet. Digital fluency, what is it? How do we get it? Flexibility, which is something that you both have talked about, and adaptability. How do we adapt with not even knowing what we need? And then finally, technological invention and innovation, and how do we really foster that in our educational systems?
Let me add one other thing to this, because I think when sometimes people can see and feel this, it makes a difference. So, for example, in our welding classes a couple years ago, we put a virtual welding machine in there. Now, we've got some people that have been doing this for a while, and they were like, why would we ever want something like this? Well, what it did was gave the students repetitions in a hurry. You could track where they were going and where their improvement was at. And we found out after that the local welding people, if you came in and one of you said, yeah, I'm a welder, they would put you on a virtual welding machine and said, show me. And so when you start seeing the downstream effects and the outcomes, I think those things start making a difference too. And going back to what she was saying, I was at a meeting with some of our diesel industry a couple of weeks ago, and they talked about every year this person almost had to be recertified without fail because of the change of the industry. And so as we look at the factors that you were talking about, we think about digital citizenship. We talk about the rigor that will help those students all the way through their lifelong learning, and then we think about workforce development.
We have time for one more question. Anybody? Okay.
Hi, Hal Speed with CS for Texas and the Microbit Foundation. You had mentioned something about that industry is going to come more involved and you'll see it accelerate from there. Are we dependent on industry becoming more involved? And if so, what role do you foresee that they're really going to play in the public education system for computer science?
We really need workforce to be involved in this, because in the state of Mississippi, the community college system has generally been the workforce development piece. Well, because of pipeline issues and all those manufacturers that I talked about, you really now have to have the high school people involved. So, for example, Toyota reached out to one of our smaller school districts recently, and they're paying for a program to be put in there for industrial maintenance. And so we need them involved, because we want them to be that downstream piece there and recognize this. In the past, the business and industry people really didn't look at the K-12 part of it as much as they should. It's not mandatory, but it would be a huge leap for us, because as they look at that entire pipeline, now they're realizing that you've got to go down to the 8th grade and give people information about career exploration. Then you need to go down to the 5th grade. And so as you start working some of these things all the way down to the kindergarten level, then it's in the business's best interest to put time, effort, and resources into this so that they get the outcome that they're looking for. Did that answer your question?
Great. All right. Any other ads or?
Well, I'd just like to thank our 3
Yeah.
panelists for sharing their experiences from their states, and thank you all for coming. It's been a pleasure and honor.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you. And are you willing to stick around a little bit if people have questions? Okay.